Don't try to sneak into your room like that. I know what you've got behind your back. Records. More new records.
You're good on camera. I've seen you on camera before. You're good. You have a problem with that?
No, not at all.
Good. It'll be fun. But it'll be fun. Believe me. So let's get started. So Bill Schnee, that's the proper pronunciation of your name, correct?
Schnee. Yeah.
Hey. Okay. So, and what's the derivation of that? Just out of curiosity.
German. It's German for snow.
Oh, that's interesting. So one of the things I like to do in these interviews with engineers who are not necessarily performers and they're not necessarily front guys is have them talk about other engineers. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
So let's talk about Bill Putnam for a second. Do you have anything to say about Bill Putnam?
In some ways, the father of modern recording.
Yeah.
And maybe in many ways, actually, built fabulous studios. Fabulous studios. I guess he started with Chicago,
right?
And of course, several great ones in Los Angeles that I worked in many times. Designed great equipment back in the old Valve days, and yeah, just I wish I'd had the chance to meet him and get to know him.
Oh, you never did, but you worked in some of his studios, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
many times.
And okay, let's go on to the next person. I know you know this guy.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep. So I got interested in hi-fi in junior high school. I started listening on a new way. I've been in music. I was involved in music, listening to music and playing music since sixth grade or something. But I got in junior high. I got into hi-fi and went to hi-fi shows and started realizing how to listen to records better. And then once I put a system together, I built my first system and so on. Then I realized that certain records sounded better than others. And one of the artists that I was into was Henry Mancini. And in those days, a lot of record companies didn't give the engineer credit on the jacket. But Hank made sure to give Al Schmidt the credit. And of course, that name stuck with me because Schmidt and Schnee are somewhat related. And the cute story about that is, let's see, that's junior high school. So it's around 1973, I think, Al and I were working in adjacent studios in the same building. Ran into him in the hall, introduced myself, said I was a big fan and I'd love to go to lunch with you sometime. And he said, sure, let's do it. So we went to lunch and they bring the bread out and he's buttering some bread. And I said, Al, I got to tell you, you are a real genius. He said, no, I'm not a genius. I said, I don't know. I've been to this RCA studios on Sunset and recorded in there. And I have no idea how you got that sound on those Henry Mancini records. And he put his piece of bread down and he looked at me and he said, well, I didn't do those in that studio. I did them in the original RCA studio on Sunset and Vine. It was an incredible room. And I went, oh, you're not a genius.
Well, he was anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, Al and I became very good friends. I moved to Nashville about 6 years in August. And I had a goodbye lunch with him where he gave me his book. It wasn't out yet. The thing is that Al started in the business where, guess what? You had to mix everything live. And that function to me is the most important thing about an engineer, well, at least a mixing engineer, is the gift of balance. I really do think it's a gift that everyone doesn't have it, but Al certainly had it. And balance was the thing. And he had, you had to do it when he got started. He recorded on wire.
Because fixing it in the mix is not really the way to go.
No. To my way of thinking, my early mentor is, I imagine you might not have heard of him, a guy named Richie Podolor. Do you know that name at all?
I know that name a lot. You were involved in the Three Dog Night records and Smith records.
Yeah.
And I noticed how great those things sounded, but there was no engineering credit on those things. But you were involved in recording those, right?
Yeah. And Richie was, the quick and dirty is my high school band got signed right out of high school. And Decca Records, and we recorded at Western. Speaking of Bill Putnam, we recorded at Western and Capitol, two of the best studios to this day. Well, if Capitol reopens, in Hollywood, and we cut 4 sides, didn't have a hit, so they dropped us, and we got another record deal, and our producer was Richie Podolor. Oh. And I went into the studio, his studio, which is a lot funkier than those other rooms. But when he played it back, the first track that we'd cut on the 604 Altex and the gray utility cabinets, I was looking at those speakers as it played, and I felt something emotionally that I'd never felt from the band. And it was my aha moment where I knew right then that engineering really can make a big difference. And right then I turned and pointed at all the equipment and said, "Can you teach me how to do all this?" And he said, "No, I'm teaching Cooper here. Go out and do another take." But that was the moment. And it's so funny because Richie Podolor, I hung on every word he said. And, he said that there's no substitute for talent. And whereas I understand what he's saying, and that's very true, multi-track recording is a substitute for talent, because that's what, right? Because that's what allowed engineers that might not have that gift to spend as long as it took to get a mix together.
Yeah. Or musicians also,
sure.
As long as it takes. So you worked on the Steppenwolf records with him, or no?
No, I didn't work on Steppenwolf. I only worked on the second Three Dog record that he was still engineering then. That was the last record he only engineered. After that, he was producing them.
Yeah. But like you, I started out with a hi-fi, and that's how I got into it. And then I started noticing that certain records sounded way better than others, and I started looking into who was engineering them. And those records that Richie Podolor engineered, those were incredibly powerful and right in your face. And you noticed that. Not everybody did, but we noticed that. So
sure.
Why is that?
And in fact, there was the group called Smith, and I did the mono mix on that, and I was really new in the business. And Richie, I said, because I skipped ahead, 3 years later, I'm working for American. 3 years earlier, I didn't know the difference between a limiter and an equalizer, and engineering came very quickly to me. And I was able to, after 2 months of begging, to convince him to give me a shot. And he gave me a shot, and it worked. And he gave me another shot, and it worked. And then he threw me in with Three Dog Night.
Were your first shots mixing, or were you actually in there putting microphones and recording people?
Yeah, the first shot, he tried me out on a demo. Publishers' demos. They used to come in 3 hours in the morning, and they'd record 5 songs or whatever, 4 or 5 songs, throw vocals on them, and you would do a quick mix, and off they go.
Yeah.
So I did one for Screen Gems one morning, and Warner Brothers the next morning, and then he threw me in with Three Dog Night
to engineer.
To engineer, and which was really wild because. Of course, I was really, really nervous because now these guys had already had a hit, and and I'm a real newbie, but they were all really nice to me. The producer, Gabriel Meckler at the time was a nice guy. Everyone was nice to me, and everything went great. I called Richie the next morning. Well, what now? Come on back and do another one. I did another one. Third night, same thing, except Mike Alsop, the guitar player, asked for something on the guitar that I hadn't. Being a keyboard player, I had no idea what he wanted. And Richie, being the astounding guitarist that he was, I'm sure Mike had gotten used to Richie helping him greatly with his sounds. Yeah. So I had to call Richie, and he and Bill came down and finished it. And that ended my recording on that album. But I did do overdubs. And most importantly, I hung out every chance I could to watch Richie and see what he did.
Yeah. That wouldn't have been enough to end your recording career, obviously, not knowing how to do that thing.
No, not at all.
What was that thing, by the way? What was it?
I don't remember. Couldn't tell you.
Yeah. But things are easier. Those kinds of things you can do now with pushing a button. You don't have to work to do those kind of things anymore, whatever it was.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Back then, that was another thing that he had instructed me in, was that people, in trying to get hits, they're always looking for something new and different. And, of course, starts with the song, and then maybe the arrangement and something in it, but also in the sounds. If you can, in a unique kind of sounds that will, sound different on the radio, that'll spark someone to want to go out and buy the record.
Right. Of course. So, that's production is people that don't pay attention to that don't pay attention to that, but it gets to them anyway. It's something draws to buy something to. So let's talk about this part of your career. You were involved And this, so that was really having to get it right right away. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, I didn't fit. By the way, when I did that mix, the mono mix, and I said, "What do I do now, Richie?" He said, "Take it to 6033 Hollywood Boulevard and hand it to Doug Sachs. He'll do the rest." Yeah. And that was my introduction to Doug.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, as you probably know, went on for, we became very, very close friends and so on. Yeah. So when he opened the mastering lab, that was his studio, his mastering studio. He had learned with Lincoln Mayorga, who is his partner and excellent keyboard pianist. He had learned that if you eliminated the tape, if you went right to the disc, it sounded better. He would go with Lincoln to this little studio on Melrose and record Lincoln's whatevers all the time. And one day they came in and the owner said, "I'm sorry, but the tape machine is on the fritz." And they said, "Oh, so we can't record today?" He said, "Well, unless you want to go right to the disc." And Lincoln said, "Sure, it's just a simple piece." Yeah. So they did that. When he went home to check it out, Doug right away noticed that the piano sounded better. It was the same piano, same miking. And they started comparing, and that's where that concept came from. So when they opened the mastering lab, there was a studio right behind the mastering lab, a very good studio with very good electronics, which is what's key.
Sure.
And they did a direct-to-disc record. Lincoln arranged some stuff, and it was really, he gave them away. It was just to show off his mastering, which, as you well know, is kind of cheating, because people coming in with their 2 generations of analog tape are not going to get a sound quite like direct-to-disc.
No.
But that's what they did for us. So anyway, then they did a second record. And by then, Doug and I were good friends, and I was hoping he'd let me do it, but he didn't. But the third one of Lincoln's, he asked me to. And that was the most fun I'd ever had in the studio. I mean, the thought of going in 3 days, you have an album recorded, mixed, and mastered, was pretty sensational. And I went back to work doing normal records on multi-track, and it was just like slow motion. So in the process, and of course, I was already on my way to being a producer, and I went to Doug and I said, "Doug, I want to do an album for you, and I want to do it with a vocalist." And he took him about 2 weeks to believe that I could do it, because he saw my enthusiasm.
Why didn't he think you could do it? Why didn't he think you could do it?
Well, whether he didn't think I could do it, but because he didn't know me as much as a producer. He did somewhat, but I think it was just the idea. Maybe he knew what was coming, which was talking to Lincoln, which that was 2 months of Doug talking to Lincoln.
Yeah. Because
Lincoln had every reason in the world for me not to do it. If we were, this isn't really a record company. If we were, it was just to record me, is what he said. Yeah. And if we were going to do this, why would we hire this young kid? On and on and on. But he finally went for it, and I did it. And I have to say, I argued with Doug. The album came out, as you well know. It was in every hi-fi store in the country, soon the world, because as you well know, and I hope if they don't, they should learn right now, that in an audio chain, the weak link almost always is the source. You give them a better source, their amplifier, cartridge, everything is going to work better.
Yes.
So it worked out, quite well for that. And then, and Doug, love him as I did and still do.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. He was not the best businessman on the planet. And right after we, once that took off, and it took off fast. So now he's got money rolling in, and he wanted to right away start getting better electronics. And the electronics in that little studio back there, it was called Continental Sound at the time, soon became Producer's Workshop, which is ultimately a couple of years later where I did Asia, where I recorded the tracks on Asia.
Wow.
Great electronics, but he wanted better. And in fact, he did ultimately make a lot better electronics, including microphones, some phenomenal microphones and so on. But he started, now that it was a record company, he started making records that, whereas they were directed disc and they sounded good, they weren't appealing music. And I went to him and I said, "Doug, I don't think that Thelma sounds any better than Lincoln's record that I recorded. It's the music is what's better. People don't want good sounding LPs. They want good sounding music. So
Agreed.
you got to give them something that they relate to, you know.
Yeah.
And when I say, I think with confidence, I can say that he wasn't a good businessman, because how in the world could he have that record, Thelma's record, that launched the era of direct-to-disc recording and so on? And as he said, literally on his deathbed to me, that was the most exciting record we ever made. And James Newton Howard was the best sounding. How could he make that record and never do a follow-up? Especially when he started coming to CES every year with a big hi-fi, and he would play his newest albums. How many people must have come up to him and said, "Oh, this is great, Doug, but when are you going to do another Thelma?" And he told me to start on it. I got with Thelma. I started looking for songs and whatnot. And then he said, no, hold off. And okay. And another year went by, and this is all for electronic development. And then another year went by, and he said, okay, you can start. Are you sure? Yeah. I started. He said, well, just, 2 months later, wait, hold on a second. He did ask a third time. I didn't even try, and there never was another Thelma.
No, the fire's out by then. The fire's out after 3 or 4 years. That's
and ultimately sad to that is Thelma went on to have a few hits, R&B hits. Yeah, and which was cool and all for her. But I started to think about doing a live 2-track company, which I am in the process now. We'll have to talk about that, of launching, and. Because I love live recording.
And would you do this to Pro Tools, or would you do it to tape, or would you go back and do it to tape?
Well, now when I had lunch with Thelma, it was to tape. Yeah. Now since then, what really started it was I'll come back to that because you're involved in it.
Yeah.
What? And I had lunch with her, and I said, we're talking, and I told her I'm thinking about putting some together, and she said, "Oh, that would be so great, Bill." Because I have to tell you, even with the success that I've had, my 2 favorite records are the one I did with you and Sun Shower, my first album that Jimmy Webb produced. Wow. And I thought that was incredibly sad, and even sadder that we never did do another record, but whatever.
And then you did this one, right?
Oh, yes. Yes. Now I did that one. A couple of very interesting things. One, on Thelma's record. Let me tell you a funny thing first. When Lincoln finally agreed, there were only 2 singers I'd been in the room with that I knew could step up to the microphone on the last song and deliver. The first one was Barbra Streisand. I had worked on her last 3 records. Right. And I went to her manager, hairdresser, boyfriend at the time, and said,
John Peters? It was John Peters?
Yes. Yeah. And said, there's a little independent company, and I'd like to do it. And it literally was, go away, kid, you're bothering me. So that wasn't going to work. The other one that I knew could deliver was someone I had just done some vocals with and mixed, a new artist on Motown, and that was Thelma. Oh. But I have to tell you that record, it's so interesting because this is just a few weeks old. I always wondered, I'm jumping ahead to Steely Dan, and I always wondered why they hired me to do Asia. And I asked Elliot Shiner, who had done their previous records, why did they hire me? And he said, because they fired me. And I said, no, that's why they didn't hire you. But why did they hire me? And he said, I don't know. But I learned with the new release on acoustic sounds of the Asia, and I read your glorious review of it, and I couldn't agree more. Done from a tape copy, no less. Yeah. God bless Bernie. Yeah. I learned that Donald Fagen wrote some liner notes on the inside that come with it, and in there it says that we had heard about this guy Bill Schnee that was involved in hi-fi recording, and that's what we wanted. I didn't know that until 3 or 4 weeks ago when I got that record.
Yeah, well, he's kind of a secondary line audiophile, I would say, Donald, because they knew great sound, they wanted great sound, they were interested in that too. Plus, being great music, which is good. It's a funny thing. I'll tell you a funny thing that's just one of these coincidences. So I was involved in an animated film in LA in 1980 called Animal Olympics, which you probably never heard of, but correct. I hired Graham Gouldman to do the music, and Jimmy Haskell did the incidental scoring, and so we needed music for a a dancer, an ice skater, and we used pictures at an exhibition, but we couldn't license any of the orchestral versions. So they brought in a piano player to do it, the original piano version, and it was Lincoln Majorca. That's how I met. It was just one of those amazing coincidences. And I knew who he was from all these records, of course, by then.
Sure.
So,
well, the next record that you held up there that was done after Thelma was Dave Grusin. And this was extremely problematic for Bill. Why? Because Doug had, in that amount of time, Doug had come up with the first thing of the higher resolution, which was he built a small 16-input console with even less electronics in it than the one at Producer's Workshop had. And there were all kinds of problems with it, and technically. And so we got there, and the first day, all these things are going wrong. And of course, it doesn't fall on Doug, it falls on the engineer.
Of course.
To the point that he pulled Doug aside and said, "Can we get a real engineer in here?" And Doug said, "We have a real engineer. These are problems that are not of his control, not of his doing.
Oh, good.
We'll get it all worked out." Another problem that was huge was who played bass on that? New York.
Ron Carter.
Yeah, he brought him out, and he has this bass that, the E string goes down to 10 cycles or something. I don't know, but it's huge down on the bottom. Well, this little console that Doug built, all it had was literal tone controls, 100 cycle and 10K. That's it. And so, as you know, in putting on the music on a disc, what do you have to do? Well, you have a preview head so that the tape sees what's coming, and it tells the computer, open the groove because this is big. Well, there's no preview head. There's the mastering engineer that has to learn the stuff, and which is what they always did on the direct-to-disc records. It was a lot of work for them.
Yeah.
And but it was the only way I could do it was to roll off his bass. And he came in to control him for the playback, and he's screaming, "What's wrong with my bass? I don't hear the bottom." So it was a nightmare for me. And Dave really didn't understand. I mean, he understood why we were doing it, but he wasn't in favor of doing it. In fact, I think it's still on his website. It was about 8 years ago. When he on his website, he talks about it, and he almost virtually says that he didn't really understand it, but the hi-fi community seems to love it.
Yeah, they still do. So you know that direct-to-disc is back, and in Germany they roll their lathe into the Berlin Philharmonic and record symphonic. Yeah, they've done
I didn't.
Bruckner Seventh Symphony, and they've done some with some other orchestras. Yeah, they roll it right into the concert hall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I got to hear those.
Oh, they're real good too. They're really good. And one of them, they went over the groove. They went past the groove. There's one little glitch, but so what? The rest of it's
what? Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
It's worth it. Well worth it.
Yeah. So
if anyone that isn't familiar with direct-to-disc, the problems are monumental. Not just what I talked about there with regard to what the mastering engineer goes through, but first of all, mixing wise, you got to realize if you're mixing a regular song from tape or from disc, whatever it is, everything comes back the same. It's the exact same vocal performance, the exact same dynamics. The guitar player's playing the same thing. Everything's identical. Direct-to-disc, you do a side of whatever it is, 15, 16 minutes, and then you do another side because each performance is the whole record. And needless to say, everyone doesn't play exactly the same, so it's constantly mixing. Yeah. So that's the problem with it for the engineer. But one of the other problems that can happen is, I mentioned, I knew I had someone that could deliver a vocal performance on the last cut, because if you mess it up, of course, the whole side is ruined.
Right.
And sure enough, on side 2 of that record, of Thelma's record, we're going along, and I mean, I am so happy. It's a great performance. I'm pretty darn happy with my mix. Everything is great. The last song on side 2 is Got to Get You Into My Life. It goes through the first verse sound, the revamp with the horns, and the second verse, and where's Thelma? And I grabbed the fader and shoved it. There's no Thelma. And what I heard was, "I'm sorry." And as the producer, I have to go, oh, that's okay, sweetie. It was sounding great, though. We're going to get it. It was wonderful. And
So you had to start the side over again, right?
yeah. And that was the one that got away.
So do you read music?
Yes, I read music. Not as good as I wish I did, but since I stopped playing years and years ago. But yeah, certainly well enough to follow along orchestra scores and when I'm doing orchestras or whatever else.
So what other records did you engineer and or produce where your name is not on it that people should know about, that you want them to know about? Because that's one of the great injustices of this whole business, is that so many great recordings were done and no credits for engineering.
I did a Rare Earth album for Motown. I know it didn't have their hits on it. It was right after that. I did Diane Carroll from Motown and something else. And no, they didn't give credit. It was always special thanks, Bill Schnee. They list the Motown engineer that recorded the stuff, and then special thanks to Bill Schnee, that kind of thing. In fact, in the middle 70s, when they asked me if I want to do a live recording, him, to do a live recording. He was going to at the Oakland Coliseum, and I went in and spoke to Suzanne DePass, who I had spoken with about Thelma. That's how I made the deal with her about the loan out arrangement, that we got to use her for the direct-to-disc record. And I said, okay, well, I have two requests that I'm really strong about. And she said, okay, what's that? And I said, well, first, I'd like it to say engineered by Bill Schnee. And secondly, I would like a shot at mixing it. If Marvin doesn't want to use the mixes, he doesn't have to, but I really want a shot. And as the old Satan goes, well, 1 out of 2 isn't that bad. Yeah, my name went on it, but no, I didn't get a shot until, and this is what's so incredible to me, about 20 years later, Motown has been sold. Suzanne's gone, everything. And there's some girl, I can't remember her name, that's running the special products division. And she calls me on the phone and says, there's an album that we'd like you to remix. Oh, what's that? Marvin Gaye Live. I said, really? I recorded that. And she said, yeah, I know. And I went, I would love to. And I don't know what in the world the deal is. I've never heard of a very successful album being remixed 20 years later. I mean, I wish I would have asked her. And it came out and it said mixed by Bill Schnee.
All right. It's like, I remember in the 60s, everything that came out on MGM was Val Valentin, although he didn't engineer all of it. He was director of engineering, but his name went on all those records for some reason.
Right. Yeah.
Many of which he probably wished his name wasn't on because they were so bad. Anyway. So what do you see? So you went from being an engineer to being a producer, because that's what happened in the industry. It seemed that you were making decisions that were beyond just putting the microphones up and making the recording. And based upon that, you felt you should be a producer as well. Correct?
Right. Well, when I saw Richie at work, who was a great, obviously a great producer and a great engineer, I just assumed that the way to get, you'd have to have control to be able to do all that. And that's what I wanted to do anyway as a musician. The only reason in the beginning I learned that I was learning engineering, I thought, was be an adjunct to me being a songwriter and ultimately a producer. And things were going along okay in my career, and my dad was a Jewish doctor. You know what that means? You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, right, Bill?
I went to law school and dropped out. I dropped out of law school too. That was my thing. So I did
too.
Oh, there you go. I did a year and a half of it. I did a year and a half, and then I dropped out. But anyway.
Well, see, I chased my band. I quit college for 2.5 years chasing the band. And the whole time my dad's going, not music, law or
of course, law and medicine. That's right.
Yeah.
Did they ever get over it? Did they ever get over it?
In my case, no. In my case, year before he died, I know I had 2 Grammy nominations and probably at that point 8 or 10 gold records. He literally sat me down, Michael, looked at me and said, when are you going to get a real job?
Okay. Can I tell you my story so you have it in your head too? So same thing. So I was working for Walt Disney. I had Roy Disney's old office. We were doing the sound for the movie Tron. I supervised the Tron soundtrack, and I'm sitting there doing all this work, and a letter comes in from my mother and my father saying, "Dear son, we're so concerned about your future. You tried to be a comedian, you tried to be a writer, none of that worked out. So we're willing to send you back to school. You can become a psychologist like our next door neighbor, Arnold Levinson, who was a musician. It didn't work out for him. We'll send you back to school." And I'm sitting there saying, "These people are crazy." It's the same story.
The voice that is locally based, nationally recognized. The high-end audio dealer in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas.
Yeah. So I quit college for 2.5 years. Then I learned engineering, and I'm getting the pressure. So as I was learning, starting out with Richie as an engineer in his studio, I started law school. I got through the first semester, started the second. The grades came out. It was all C's and a B. I'm not a faker. I was faking it because I didn't have time to do the reading with sessions and the school classwork. So I quit law school for 1.5 years, and I figured if I can't do it, that's it. And fortunately, for the legal profession, fortunately, my a good friend who has become a good friend, but he was a client at the time, got a job at CBS and told Clive about me. And basically, Clive called me and said, "What do you want to do with your life?" I said, "I think I'm going to finish law school." And he almost interrupted. No, you don't want to go to law school. I don't want to. If you have music in your blood, you need to be doing that. And I said, that's what I want to do. And he gave me the shot. And the first time out, I produced a band called Sweat Hog, and we had a hit. I think it was like not a big hit, number 17 or something, but that's what got the ball rolling in 1971.
Excellent. That's great. So you did the right thing by getting out of law school. Me too. It was the best thing I ever did, was not stay in law school. So the business has changed tremendously over the last 20 years or so. You've had to
really? I hadn't noticed.
You hadn't noticed? I mean, I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, you'd see these couriers and bicycles moving tapes. They had tapes in the front basket of their bicycle, and they were driving around, Los Angeles and Hollywood with tapes, taking them to studios, and it was going to that Ampro place and buying tapes. And I saw all that, and then that all disappeared. So, and you had to change. You had to redo your whole business plan. You had to get into Pro Tools and get into all this digital stuff, right? And at first, did you like it, or you did not? You liked the convenience of it, or how did you deal with that?
I went into digital kicking and screaming. I mean, I just did not get it, and because 1644.1, I don't care, Nyquist, Blyquist, 1644.1 is a joke.
But Nyquist proves it's perfect. Don't you know that? Yeah. I hate those people. They drive me crazy. Okay.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I went kicking and screaming, and almost as much as Doug did. But so the first shift professionally was with dash machines, the tape machines, digital tape machines.
Yeah.
And there's 3 on the market, and some people want this one, some want that one. So I didn't buy one for my studio. I figured if somebody really wants to record digitally, they'll rent it, and that's what they did.
Yeah, Which one? And which one sounded best to you? The Mitsubishi or the Sony or none of them? But
the least bad. I don't know.
Least bad.
I honestly don't remember in the beginning what I thought.
I remember
the fact that
I was living in Los Angeles. I was writing for a small magazine called Music Connection in Los Angeles, and
sure,
Chris Stone, who owned the record plant there, I think.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he's a big advocate for this digital recording. He's talking about how great it is. I keep reading these stories, and then it turns out he was Sony's salesperson. he became, I wonder what. That was really annoying.
Oh, that's wild. Yeah. So and it wasn't until and of course things got a little bit better, but even the that last 3348, the last Sony HR or whatever it was, and I think that was still 48K. Yeah, it was still 48K. Now it was 24-bit.
Yeah,
and
that's the big difference, right? That's what it's the bit depth that made a big difference in better sound for digital, don't you think?
Well, it's a combination of both to me. I mean, 96 sounds better than 48, and 192 sounds better than 96. So it's but I then came Pro Tools, and it wasn't quite in the music circles quite yet. It was the film had gobbled it up right away.
Yeah.
And I produced a song for the end title of a movie, and it was the person shall remain nameless, but was not a great singer, and I needed some help. So I called a friend that's working in the movie business that had a Pro Tools rig, and he came, set it up in my shop, and I gave him the vocal, the track and the vocal, and I put that in tune, because prior to that, the way we tuned vocals was with this hardware box called a harmonizer, and it was incredibly painful to do, and not super accurate and whatnot, but whatever. And so he had that for 45 minutes or something. I went in and listened to it, and I went, oh my gosh, well, that sure is easy. But it wasn't, I didn't have enough good stuff for a ending. And he took all of the vocal parts. It was a duet, and he took all the vocal parts and manufactured something, and called me back in an hour later. And when I listened to what he had done, I didn't like it all musically. I redid it with him. But when I heard what he had done, I went, that's it. As a production value, it's over. That will rule the world.
Yes,
because, like you said earlier, there's no substitute for talent, and this just takes it to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
So, and now, like two of my mentors, not Doug Sachs, the other two of my mentors were both excellent tape editors. So I had to become a good tape editor, and I think I was pretty darn good, and I loved editing tape.
I do too. I loved editing tape. I still enjoy editing tape. It's magic. You make this cut and you play it. Oh, it's
And so, but I have to say that Pro Tools, it's even, there's no Command Z when you've got bits of tape taped on the wall that you're trying to move around and stuff. So,
but it's gotten better, right? We all have to say it's gotten better.
Oh, absolutely, gotten better. Not even close. Especially with but in general, just going from that early 80s digital, where we've learned so much about filtering, learned so much about conversion, how important that is and what it takes both ways, ADDA. And today, like I said, I'm doing recordings at 192 with some proprietary stuff, and it's direct to disc. It is in my studio, which was the most high resolution studio I or Doug had ever been in. I had Sergio Mendez's band in there playing, and going from through the glass to the throughput of digital, absolutely no difference, and no funny little things that you sometimes get with 48K or even 96 sometimes. So digital is now the whole point. The one thing about that is that I talked about in my book is, do
you have a copy of your book there? You have a copy of your book there? I want you to be a better businessman than Doug Sachs was, and hold up your book.
I don't have it.
Oh, okay. So you're the same businessman as Doug Sachs. Okay, birds of a feather. I get it.
it begets the question: why doesn't Michael Fremer have a copy he can hold up and show?
That's right. I've got a copy of my record that I produced, but I don't have it here because I'm gonna give
there
this
you
to
go.
Nathan. But anyway, let's go back where we were.
So the fact is that the sound of music, after we got tape recording from the Germans, the sound of music was tape, and tape has a sound.
Yes,
it's not a mirror. It is absolutely not a mirror. I don't care whether it's at 30 IPS. It's not a mirror. You in my studio, if I had a band, they playing a great track, I'm listening through the electronics, analog, come in, hit play. They think it sounds great, and it did sound great, but it wasn't what I had just heard. There's noise. If you're at 15, the bottom end is pretty darn great, but the top end is very silky. At 30, the top end is silky, but the bottom end isn't as solid. There's distortions. There's all kinds of stuff. It's not a mirror, but that's what we dealt with first. Live to tape, and then 2-channel, 3-track, 4-track, where it was mixed down onto 8-track, 16, 24, 48.
And how great! But despite all those problems, how many great recordings and how many great records came out? I mean, amazing,
absolutely
great stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And because you'd work with whatever you have at hand, the technology at hand.
That's right.
My point, though, is it all had that sound. And so, when you go direct to disc, you eliminate two passes of analog tape and one pass through the console. You get a sound like, totally different. It doesn't have that coloration. And I've always analogized it to the fact that if movies could have been made in the turn of the 2 centuries ago, 1900s, if they could have started movies with a digital, and then someone came out with film, everyone would go, "Are you crazy? The colors are all blurred. This, that, it's not sharp and all that kind of stuff." Yeah. But that was the look of a movie. And when they started doing, things with digital recording, everyone went, "It looks like daytime soap operas." That's not a movie.
That's exactly right.
So now they have all kinds of software to try to, so they can shoot digitally and make it look like a movie.
Right.
But that's the same thing that went on with records.
My big problem was when people said something that sounded absolutely horrible, they would say it sounded great. That's what made me crazy. I wasn't against changing the technology. It was saying, okay, it's a new technology. We're just starting out with it. It's not so good right now. Maybe it'll get good. But people were buying these CDs that were transfers of, I don't know where they got it from, but compared to the records, they sounded terrible. And people were saying how great it was. That's what drove me crazy about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it was, and it never has changed and never will. They were hiring, they quite often didn't go back to the mastering engineer to see, are you doing this digital stuff, which they all were.
Yeah.
They did it in-house if they had the ability, and with what kind of quality. Why? To save money. And so we find today a word that doesn't mean a lot to me, Atmos, that where they're out there, the record companies hiring guys that aren't that great to do all these Atmos mixes.
Yeah.
And for that and a whole bunch of other reasons, it's really messing with the art form. But let's not go there.
No, I agree, but you have to do it now. Everybody, it's kind of like it's forced upon everybody. But most people that are listening, they're not hearing it. They're hearing it through headphones. They're not hearing, I got to see this. Giles Martin did this big remix of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds in Atmos stereo. And I just thought it was ridiculous. It was like spread out all over the place. And there was this 40-foot Brian Wilson in the middle singing. And it was like, that's not what this record was about. Why do that? Yeah. And people aren't even listening. Whatever. Okay, you're right. Whatever. It's happening.
Yeah.
But so now we're in this retro period where young people are buying records again and digging, stuff cut from tape again. Do you like that? Is it great? Is it great, or is it some hipster nonsense that's going to go away? I don't think so.
Well, in fact, I'm going to come back and I'll circle back to ask you a question about that. But I heard, like it was about 10 years ago, I heard that over 50% of the LPs sold never come out of the jacket. They're bought for the.
I don't believe it.
Well, I do think a lot of them, when people are buying, whatever, a lot of young people are doing that. But for sure, more and more now are going back to it. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, the whole
once
album
they hear
experience.
Once they hear it, once they hear a good playback, there's something about it. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it, distortions or whatever, that make people want to sit and listen to it. I know that for a fact. I hang out with a lot of young people, and they tell me that.
And I love the fact that the whole concept of listening to a side of an album, 4 or 5, whatever songs in a row. I mean, we used to spend a lot of time figuring, what that running order should be and all that. And the whole idea of being able to absorb, sit down when you bought an album and look at the artist, at the pictures, and read liner notes and so on and so forth. And the whole idea, of going through the album. If the third song on the second side, I don't really like it, but you lived through it. You weren't about to get up and change it. And funny enough, after about a month or two, that song isn't that bad.
Not only that, but it belongs in between those two other great songs. It belongs there, and the way it flows, you appreciate that's why greatest hits records they never are as good as the record that they came from. They just aren't.
Right.
The same reason.
Exactly. So I love all the aspects of that, of it coming back like that. And you're right. I remember vividly whenever I would master an album that I had mixed with Doug, that there was something on the playback, and he had very good playback, and it was the same speakers and power amplifier that I'd heard the tape on, but there was something about that. In some cases, it almost covered a couple of ills or something. I don't know, but it was always a positive thing.
Yeah, I know some mastering engineers who say that they like the digital recordings put on vinyl because it covers up problems and makes it sound better for some reason. Better is all I care about. I don't care whether you measure it and it doesn't measure as well. I just care if it's pleasing to the ears. That's all that really matters in all of this, I think.
Exactly. Learned that so early on from Doug, because you'd have 2 amplifiers, and one of them, they were both down in very low numbers of distortion, but the one with the higher distortion sounded better. Right. It's just more euphonic to our ears. Right. And
recordings are all frauds anyway. They're fake. Nothing. We can't. No microphone is going to give you what's in the room when you're playing it, when you're hearing it live. So you do the best you can, and whatever makes it sound. Like, everybody got rid of their Neumann tube microphones because they were higher distortion, and of course the people that bought them up are now worth a lot of money. Because
may I tell you something? You're talking to someone that is selling it off now, a huge collection of tube microphones. One of the larger ones. Wow. I don't know if you know what a Telefunken 251 is.
I don't know that one particularly.
Okay, well, I just sold one for $35,000. I paid $400 and $500, exactly what you said, $400 and $500 in the early 70s, because the 414, the transistor version with the same capsule, had come out, and that's what everyone wanted. And so, if you want that old tube thing, take it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And isn't that great? Do you like the fact that younger engineers are paying attention now to what sounds good as opposed to doing all the measuring? I think recordings are getting better now. A lot of younger.
I can only hope so. But yes, I love the fact.
I believe so. I really do. It was horrible for a long time, but I think it's getting much better now. There's much better young people. They. I mean, Billie Eilish. I don't know if you know Billie Eilish. Her records sound really good. And they recorded some of those in her bedroom, and they sound really good. I don't want to say anything bad about anything good about recording in bedrooms to a guy that owns a recording studio, but nonetheless, if you know what you're doing and a good
it's the modern era. What can I say? I produced a girl last year, a modern kind of girl, and it was all because of that. The sound that I was going for, that she needed, is all very modern with samples and whatnot. So with this great microphone collection, the only microphone that I used was on her voice. Everything else was in the box, in the computer.
You're selling these microphones off just because you have too many and you'd rather have the money? I don't blame you for that.
No, because I sold my studio in LA when I saw the record business was changing, going downhill, as it were. Before it switched from a companies that sold a product to companies that lease a product. But I saw the handwriting on the wall early on, and so I kept all the equipment and got out of there, and then I got cancer, which is another story. I did build a mixing room because I love mixing in Burbank, and I might still be there, except that a couple of years in, the owner of the building came to me very apologetically and said that one of the trade unions wants to buy the building for them. They want the whole thing. So when your lease is up, you'll have to go. And they let me stay even longer. But the day came when I had to go, and then it was what now? And my wife and I decided to try the great experiment and move to Nashville, because there's more recording going on here than in LA.
Yes.
It's a much healthier music environment. So and it's been a great move.
And people
So the reason I'm selling it is I don't have the use for them anymore. There's 2 studios here that have excellent microphone collection of valve tube microphones, and I'm not getting any younger, but I'm in great health. And whatnot. And I even more importantly, I have all the passion for music I had in 1964 when my band got signed. So I want to do this until I fall over.
That's people say, when are you retiring? I say, I want to end up like John Pfeiffer. You know, John Pfeiffer, he was head of RCA Records and classical division. And he was found slumped over his desk holding on to a recording contract. That's the way to go.
That's my joke has been, it's going to be, I hit the talk back in the studio and go, guys, the B flat and the B.
Right. That's the way. That's the way.
Carry me out. But even though I'm in great health and everything, I figure it's better for me to sell them than to burden my wife with it whenever that day comes. So
I try to tell my wife what my records are worth. I try to show her what's in the record collect, but she is not interested. I said, well, okay, but someone's going to come and buy it. Like Chad Castle will come buy it and give you not as much money as you should get. But there's things in those records you should know about. She doesn't care. But okay, that's her problem. Although she thinks I'm going to outlive her. Do you know who this guy is? Just out of curiosity. Oh. One's obviously me when I was young, but the other guy, you know who that guy is? That's Bill Porter. You know Bill Porter? He recorded all the Elvis stuff and Roy Orbison.
Yeah.
We gave him an award. He was a really nice guy. He was a really nice guy. I met him in Nashville. So, the record that I put out was cut on Doug Sachs's restored mastering system that's at Chad Kassem's place now. So his cutting system is still operating, still doing great work. And that's just really nice to know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to visit him. I actually brokered the deal. After Doug passed away, I handled all of that with Chad. I got to know him back then. And I'm going to go see his whole setup.
Oh, cool. He's a character.
Oh, he is.
Hey, man, I kept the flame alive when nobody cared about records, man, but you and I. That was I love Chad.
That's pretty much true.
Yeah.
Lord knows you've kept the flame alive.
I tried. Anyway, so this has been great. Let's talk about Asia a little bit. Okay, so these guys are perfectionists, but they're also good musicians. So was when you got approached to do that, were you hesitant in some ways?
Very much, because a couple of my good friends, Michael Marty and Jeff Picard, whoever, they had played on previous records and told me about what it was like in the studio. And I'm a pretty high energy guy. I like to go fast. My creativity wants to keep moving and whatnot. Stop and start and stop and start doesn't hang well with me. So I was definitely, as soon as Gary Katz, the producer, called me, I said, yes, I'd love to. And when I got off the phone, I went, gee, what have I got myself into? But whatever. But to my surprise, it was nothing like what I expected. First of all, that album, it was unique in the way they approached it. It was all studio musicians. Now, they had definitely used some studio musicians as the years had come to that. Yeah. But this was all studio musicians, period, in the studio. Very professional sessions. We started at 2:00. We didn't go late into the night. They were union sessions. And they had, it was a no drug zone. That might have been a bit unique.
That helped.
At least the tracking. At least the tracking was. It was a no drug zone. And they brought in a piano bass demo of every song that Larry Carlton had been given previously and done the charts for. And those piano bass demos were always just jewelry. In fact, on 2 occasions, one of the musicians said, guys, why don't you just put the drums on that? We're not going to get it any better than that. And Donald said, no, we'll get it better. And did we? I don't know, because they made great demos. In fact, funny stories. If you,
okay, I'm sorry. Did they play anything on those records? Or
but not on the tracking. Not on the tracking.
Oh, okay.
I think Donald. Walter replaced the bass. I think on one. I'd have to look at the credits. That was after I was gone. I only did the few weeks of tracking sessions.
Okay.
Then they went off and did months of overdubs.
Yeah.
But to their credit, that they didn't mess things up with what the initial oomph of what was there. In fact, funny story is that about 6-8 years ago, this one of the second engineers that had been on those sessions with me confessed that he had gone in after everyone went home and copied some of the tracks.
Oh.
And he told me which ones, and I got very indignant with him. I said, I can't believe you would do that. Not that you went in and did it, but you didn't take all of them. Why did you only got about 6 of them? I don't understand, but whatever. But one of the ones is Asia, the song Asia.
Yeah.
And doggone, what can I say about that as a piece of music?
Yeah.
The chord structure in that. I mean, I was taken with it then, and I'm taken with it now. And I remember distinctly thinking, because every day I would take a cassette and pop it in my car on the way home to hear what we had done. And, but after the third day, I'm thinking, what is this? Because it's a little bluesy. It's a little poppy. It's a little this, a little
jazz,
not really rocky. But all I know is it's great. That's the only thing you can say about it. And
did you know it was going to be a classic and that it was going to be a great release? Did you get that sense?
I can't say that I knew that. I just knew that it was an unbelievably unique grouping of songs. A lot of which didn't have vocals at the time. That's what I was going to say about Asia. Yeah. I remember listening to that 8-minute or however long it is thing and going, how is he going to put a melody in there? But as it turns out, he basically copied what the lines that are in there are. But yeah, I didn't know. Sometimes something is a hit, but I can't say. I just knew that it was incredible.
So you did the tracking part, but you didn't do the mix, right?
No. What happened with that is
a woman from Motown got involved and said you couldn't do it.
No, maybe worse in a way. So what happened is when we finished the tracks, they came to me, Donald and Walter came and said, okay, we're going to go off and do overdubs for a while, but we want to reunite and have you mix it. And I said, guys, I don't think it would work. And they looked at me and said, what do you mean? I said, well, my mixing style is, kind of different, unique. Back then, this is before there were computers moving faders to help you. I mixed for a performance. I would get the static balance of where I thought it should be. But every mix, I was going for it, and and adjusting to taste, as it were.
Yeah.
And I was just afraid of what would happen. And so they said, "Well, you'll try, won't you?" Kind of like I said, "Of course." So 6 months later, they called me. I went into a studio. Donald doesn't remember it, so I guess it was Walter. Donald didn't come, but it was Walter and Gary. And it was Josie when Josie comes home. And funny enough, it really wasn't finished, as I learned later on. But whatever. And I got the mix up on Josie. They called and I said, yeah, come on over. It's ready. And they listened to it and they both loved what they heard. And then it started. Well, what if we tried, this? What if we tried that there and this here? What if we tried, each time? And that with what I wanted to do. And it went on probably another three hours. And they could tell I was getting worn out. I was just worn out. Yeah. And so I stopped and I said, guys, you got a phenomenal album here. And whoever mixes it, it's going to be great.
So, but when did you? It wasn't until the final record came out then that you got to hear what was added to all these tracking sessions that you did. So that must have been like a revelation of some kind. I mean, interesting.
Well, again, except that, and it goes both ways because let me start in the back end. When I got the tracks from this guy 8 years ago, it was like, wow, it feels like 90% was there in the tracking, and it was in some cases.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, when the record came out, I was blown away. But how great it sounded. I was so happy to hear how great it sounded. Elliot, again, my good friend Elliot did most of it.
Yep. And Bernie mastered it. And Bernie mastered it all these years later. These are all just great stories, I think. Just fantastic stories. All right. I think anything else you want to talk about involved with Asia? So were there bouncing anything to digital machines for safeties? All kinds of stories adding overdubs.
We didn't have digital machines. There were no digital machines in '77.
Not even when did the 3M come along? That was
That was pretty darn close, but
yeah.
everyone was afraid of that machine in the beginning. I don't know why. I thought it was one of the better sounding ones ultimately, but it was pretty electronic sounding. But
yes, that's what I bought Bop Till You Drop. Ry Cooder did the first rock record, a digital, and I went to Licorice Pizza in Santa Monica and I bought that record. I was so excited to hear this new thing, and I put it on the seat next to me and I looked at it like a cheap date. It was like a cheap date. Oh my God, there it is. And I got home and I had all the other Ry Cooder albums that I loved, and I put this record on, and it's a minute later I was like, uh-oh. It made me feel bad. Forget about how it sounded. It sounded fake, but it made me feel bad. The notes, instead of piling up, elevating my feelings, it made me feel depressed. That was a really interesting thing.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of talk about that whole what listening to digital did/does to the human body. So who knows? But yeah, I know. I can imagine.
But it's better now. I mean, it was the timing thing. Our brains are like evolved from how we survived by hearing things when things were. And so when the timing goes off, it upsets us. And so
yeah.
I don't want to get too far into that weeds because
they're weeds.
So these days you're living in Nashville, and do you have a studio there?
I have a mix room in my house.
Mix room in your house.
If you can't beat them, you join them.
Yeah, a lot of that's going on. And do you still do sessions in studios that you?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's a couple of really great studios here, and I try to stick to those because, like I said, they have the microphones, all the tube microphones I love. So
yeah. And Nashville's a good place to be for a musician and for an engineer. And it's
just such like I said, the community itself is so great. There's a guy here that was an instructor. There's a Blackbird is one of the best studio complexes here, and they have a training course for engineers, and the guy that ran that sadly just passed away less than a month ago. Great guy, and he would have engineer lunches where all engineers are welcome to come and just congregate and whatnot. That kind of thing goes on. We had a teeny bit of that in LA, but it was sort of like whatever. Nothing like it is here. It's really great here.
Everybody was too busy back then to sit around and talk, right? I mean, it's just one session after another after another. So I'm glad you're enjoying it down there. And anything else about Asia you want to talk about? Anything? Was some of the songs on Gaucho you recorded? Did you record which song on Gaucho did you record?
What's it called? The last song. It's
on Bad with.
It changed titles. Yeah. It was cut with a different title. Yeah, it's we cut 4 Steve Gadd songs, 4 songs with Steve Gadd. And well, here's one of my favorite stories about that. So the first day, I'm really excited that Steve Gadd is going to be one of the drummers. And
he's quite good, obviously.
Yeah, and well, I just went crazy for the drums on 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
Yes,
which was Steve. And so we went in and cut the first 2 songs. I was so excited that I called my good friend, Richard Perry, the great record producer of that era. I said, Steve Gadd? Yeah. Well, I just cut 2 songs with him. He's incredible. And he said, well, can I use him? Can I record with him? I said, well, he's leaving town. He only have him tomorrow and he's gone. Well, what time do you start? So I knew what he wanted. So I called Gary Katz, who was a big fan of Richard's, and he said, sure, let him come in. We don't start till 2, but you get him out at 1, because he also knew Richard's maniacal ways. He would beat rhythm sections up, go for hours getting a track, because he said if the boys start late, they're going to kill me for doing this. So I said, I'll get him out. So he shows up the next day with this affable little character named Leo Sayer, and we started doing a song, and lo and behold, he cuts we cut You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, #1 record. And it's
just on a whim while you're waiting.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what he came to do. I think he'd already cut it. Okay. They'd already cut it at Richard's studio, but now with Steve Gadd, he wanted to do it again, so we did it. And you go back and listen to it, you'll hear that drag snare thing again. It's totally different than 50 Ways, but it's great. And then and unbelievably so, we got it in 2 hours and 35 minutes. Unbelievable for Richard Perry. completely believable for Richard Perry. Bill, can we do another one? I said, Richard, we got 25 minutes. Give me a break. He said, please. I said, all right, start it. But I'm turning the monitor off. And it went 5 minutes over before I turned the monitor off. They didn't even get to hear a playback. And that was a song called How Much Love. You Make Me Feel Like Dancing was the first single, I believe, went to number one. The second was When I Need You, also went to number one. The third single was How Much Love, went to like number 17. And that afternoon, I cut the song Asia. That's what's called a really good day in the studio.
Wow. No kidding.
Maybe my best single day in the studio.
So have you come across any young performers that you're excited about?
Not very many, to be honest. I wish I could. I really wish I could.
I get it. I get you.
Because that's my favorite thing, is working with, I've worked with people that were already successful, like Boz Scaggs, that already had his huge record when I took over. But I did Pablo Cruz, Huey Lewis and the News, where you go 0 to 60, and there's something so rewarding about that.
And how are these musicians to work with? I mean, a lot of them are obviously very famous and they're big time. Do you find that the bigger they are, the nicer they are, or the bigger they are?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And also the less ego, no ego.
That's right.
Yeah.
I found that when I was doing personal appearances on TV stations just to promote converting your records to cassettes.
Oh, wow.
I'd go to these, and then I did it again for CDRs, but I'd go to these small towns and do these things, and they would treat me like dirt. And then I got to do it on the Today Show with Brian Gumbel, and he was so nice and so welcoming. And that's the difference. The guys that get up there are the nicer people, I think.
Yeah, I know. I said for years, because so early on in my career, 72, I recorded all the Beatles for Ringo's album.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, and it started with the setup where I went in the night before to mic the drums, and here's the flight case that says the Beatles, Ringo Starr, and I start shaking. Then I'm sure.
Did you really shake? Did you really shake? Was it really that? I mean, seriously, did
no, I didn't shake. But was I nervous the next day when he came in and I shook his hand? Hell yes.
And you recorded Photograph. You did that record, right?
Yeah, that whole album.
It's a great sounding record. Really,
recorded and mixed. And the next day, Harrison came over from England, and he showed up, and the quiet one, as he was called in the group, but he wasn't that quiet with us. And again, Ringo is what you see is what you get, and George was too, just incredibly nice and outgoing. And then on the end of the week, Richard Perry said, "Now on Monday, John's coming in with his song for Ringo," and so I went. 3 Beatles, huh? And Michael, that was the only time after the breakup that 3 Beatles would ever be in the room playing music again. And the greatest part of that story is a supposition on my part. I look at that album as that these guys, his mates, had all jumped in to give him a leg up because they knew their songwriting would carry them on their solo projects.
Yeah.
But Ringo wasn't that much of a writer. And Paul at that time had a drug bust and was not allowed in the United States for 18 months, I think. And who knows, if he hadn't had that he might have jumped on a plane.
Wow.
And maybe enough of the bad blood had dried that he and John could have gotten in the room with the other two and had history being made.
Who knows what could have happened from that? Yeah.
But that day I was incredibly nervous with John, and he didn't make it easy. It was, I think, it was awkward for all of them a little bit, obviously.
Yeah.
First time in 3 years, 3.5 years, whatever it was that they'd been together and so on. But he just took over, and that was the end of that. The next album, which unfortunately they all didn't jump in on because of their solo careers, but John actually contributed a lot more. I got to spend a lot more time, quality, so quote unquote, with John. But yeah, all just the greatest guys. George, when we had to go to England, obviously, to record Paul and Linda's song that they had written. And on the weekend, George, who had come back to England with us, invited us to his castle for his wife to cook us dinner and so on. Just completely wonderful people.
Yeah. And, my accountant, believe it or not, was one of the producers of the concert for Bangladesh.
Oh.
And he was good friends with George. And and Ravi Shankar, and and he has great stories that I won't tell you on camera. So anyway, it was great to finally get to talk to you and meet you on Zoom. I waited 2 years for this, and it was worth it. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with me. So thank you, Bill.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I've been the same 2 years I've been wanting this, because as I recall, I reached out to you. Yeah, so it's been wonderful.